What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Kings Court with me, Vincent Miracle, here for Fansided.com, GoldenGateSports.com, and SatKingsNation.com. Joining me, as always, is co-host Ryan Hernandez. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I can't wait for this episode to get started, and so happy to be here, so let's go.
All right, and you guys may have noticed there's three heads at the bottom this time. Joining us today on this show, he's been on the podcast before, coming back again. You guys loved what he gave us before. Cowbell Kingdom's JamesHam. James, welcome back to the Kings Court.
What's going on, guys?
All right, James, so let's just jump right in, get this topics all flowing and going here. The Kings, another 28-win season, not a great season, but this is the season of change. You had Coach Michael Malone coming in. You had, new owner Vivek Ranadive. What did you take from this season? I guess you would say, what were your grades from the season from top to bottom, from, the front office all the way down to the players?
Well, I think this is a really difficult season to really judge a team on because you have so many variables happening. So many changes are being made, and we talk about like new ownership, new coaching staff, new front office, but it's more than that. I think that this team could have dealt with those changes, and they could have won like 35, 38 games, barring injuries, if they hadn't made all the roster changes. And the roster changes are really, really what slowed down Michael Malone. And I don't blame Pete D'Alessandro for making those roster changes. He wanted his own people here. I think he did a really good job of bringing in new faces. I mean, throughout this season, what we saw, 7 players exit at least. Through substantial trades. I mean, that one trade was 4 for 3. I mean, you don't see that happen very often, especially so early in the season. They didn't even make it through November without a trade. That's where we saw the Luke Baumute trade for Derek Williams. So, you're looking at like 7 regulars. I know, like we've talked about it in the past on the Cowbell Kingdom podcast, that in the Toronto, New Jersey series, that there were four of the 5 opening night starters for the Sacramento Kings were playing in that series. That's just crazy to think about. Gravis Vasquez, opened the season as a starting point guard. You have Marcus Thornton at the shooting guard. You had John Salmons at the small forward and Patrick Patterson at the power forward position, all alongside DeMarcus Cousins. And those players, along with plenty of others, are just gone. And it's really incredible to see that much turnover in one season, and it's really tough to coach when you're always trying to adjust. Again, the late season injury to Isaiah Thomas really, really hamstrung Michael Malone, where he only had Ray McCallum to go to. Ray McCallum held his own, but that's not what you wanted to see, a rookie just get thrown in and playing 48 minutes a night. So it's really tough to grade this team. And I know that the coaching staff and D'Alessandro, they've been very honest and say, grade us on 28 wins because that's what we did. But I think you have to kind of give this an incomplete from top to bottom and just kind of, we have to see where it goes from here. It's such a pivotal offseason.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned Ray McCallum as one of the rookies. I actually want to get your take on another rookie, Ben McLemore. He was a starter to the bench and then finished the season once again as a starter. What was your take on his first season with Sacramento? Because, you have such mixed reviews. Some who give him that positive review of, oh, he showed light at the end of the season, and then some who say, well, Kings probably just picked up another bust. What do you think of Ben McLemore's first season with Sacramento?
Well, it's really tough because, number one, he did not hit shots. He bricked so many layups, it was ridiculous. And he's a good kid. I know he's going to work really hard in the offseason, but the issues that we saw all the way back to Summer League really reared their ugly head again and again throughout the season. He's not an NBA-ready ball handler at all. He cannot be the second option as a dribbler. He can't even be a third option in most systems. If you're going to run a third, him bringing the ball up the floor, all teams are going to run traps for him. I know in the past, teams did this against Jimmer Fredette, and they had very good results. Well, I got to be honest with you, Jimmer Fredette is twice the ball handler that Ben McLemore is. The other problem I saw with Ben, and again, he's a great kid and he can work on this. He needs to be working. He needs to go down to the Bay Area for a couple of weeks and spend some time with Jerry Rice, because to me, Ben McLemore does not have good hands. And that more than any one thing I thought was the issue. He would come off screens, be wide open for a jumper, and he'd bobble the pass. He'd be on a breakaway, bobble the pass. He really, really struggles with just catching the ball, and that's something that doesn't typically get that much better as a player grows in the league. And so he's going to have to spend a lot of time this summer working on that. I thought overall, he does have a beautiful shooting touch. He does have incredible athleticism. And the thing that really struck me early on is that he's so fluid and balanced. And that's something that you can't teach either. He's such a balanced athlete. And that's what I loved watching him. There's not that many players in the league that can, from a full stop, just pull up and look absolutely perfect in their form. I even compared his balance to like young Kobe Bryant, not skill level, not ability, but just balance alone, because you don't see it from a guy his size, 6'5", who just really has so much like core strength and ability to keep it to stay upright and to not lean one way or another way. I mean, like, look at Derek Williams. I mean, we watched Derek Williams, 60 games of Derek Williams, and all he does is either lean to the right, lean to the left, lean back, or lean forward on his jump shot. Not once did he go straight up and shoot a jumper, and he just doesn't have great balance. He's always off balance, and so that's something that I think we can take away from Ben McLemore, that he really wants to be better. I think having 3 20-point scores around him really hurt him. He's a kid who isn't ready to enforce his will on his teammates. And that's something that as he grows as a player, we're going to see him do more. Or we won't see him do more, and then he'll fade. And that's not what you want. What you want is him to be assertive. And it's really tough when you're dealing with Rudy Gay, who's such a top-notch athlete, and you're dealing with DeMarcus Cousins, who was just so incredible this year, and Isaiah Thomas, who's just so gutsy. It's really hard to say, look, pass me the ball. You guys have left me out of the offense the whole game. And, for that matter, even a guy like Jason Thompson couldn't do that. He didn't have the strength of will to force his teammates to make him part of the offense. And I think that's one of the true challenges for Michael Malone going forward with Ben McLemore. How do I get him to be more assertive? How do I get his teammates to get him more involved? Can I work this out and make him a valuable piece to the puzzle? Or do the Kings need to go chase a really solid, veteran, defensive-minded, three-point shooting two-guard in the offseason to play 24 to 30 minutes a game and let Ben McLemore take a year or two to get acclimated to the league? A guy like Tony Allen, a guy like Danny
Thabo
Green.
Savalosha.
Yeah, like Thabo. I mean, you're not going to pry – I don't think you're going to be able to pry Thabo away from Oklahoma City, because he's not a guy who's going to make $8 million a year. He's a guy who's going to be, not even middle-level exemption money, who's had some knee injuries, who's had some health issues over the course of time. So $3 or $4 million you're going to throw at a guy. If he's going to get that as his offer, he'll probably just stay with OKC. So you got to find the right guy. You got to find the right fit to sort of bring Ben McLemore along. Maybe Jason Terry's that guy. I don't know what's going to happen on Jason Terry, but he might be a guy that could help out in that situation, just not the defensive-minded guy that you're looking for.
Yeah, see, with Ben McLemore, one of the biggest flaws that I saw with his game was finishing around the basket as well. Then that was with both rookies. They could not find a way to make a layup a lot of times, which was kind of astonishing because that's in the NBA. But, I mean, what do I know? I'm not in the NBA, so I couldn't really tell you anything about that. But that was one of the biggest flaws I've seen. But the big positive I saw was, yes, that jump shot that he had was very, very beautiful. It looks very, very nice. Quick release. He gets up on elevation with his shot. And I love that I think he's the best player on the Kings to move without the basketball in his hands, meaning going from baseline to baseline to each three, and I think he's one of the best players at that. And what article, I believe you wrote it, was you compared his first season with Peja Stojakovic, so people should not give up on Ben McLemore just yet, because statistically he was right there with Peja. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit more on the article that I'm kind of bringing up right now?
Yeah, you're bringing it up. John wrote it. John Santiago, my partner at Cowbell. But that's okay. And like he compared him statistically to Peja, which I think is fair. But I don't know that he's ever going to be that type of shooter. I compared him to Gerald Green. There we go. I compared him a lot to Gerald Green, who took, till he's 27, 28 years old to kind of figure out the balance, but the athleticism, the shooting touch, his ability to rise up, his ability to defend, but McLemore's not there as a defender yet, just like Gerald Green wasn't. He plays windshield wiper defense, I call it. He jumps past you one way and then he's jumping past you again. You're like, all right, man, are you going to try to stay in front of me, or are you just going to fly across and fly back? He just needs some more training. He needs more time to grow. His team defense was atrocious. I mean, how many times this season did the Kings just get lit up from three? And it's like, look, man, just stand next to Kyle Korver. Don't go anywhere else. You just stand next to Kyle Korver and don't do anything. Just stand there, and he can't get a shot off. And next thing you know, Kyle Korver's dropping 8 threes on you, and you're like, oh, Jesus, come on, man. So, I mean, those are things that it's basketball IQ. He's a young player. He only had 1 year of college basketball. He started basketball late in his life as well. He didn't have the money for high-end trainers that were working on all of these aspects of his game with him as a young kid. Very, very poor kid coming up through high school and into college. So, I mean, the potential's there. The Kings are going to invest. One other thing I'll point out, Ben McLemore will play in Summer League, but he also is back at Kansas this summer. One of his goals in life is to get his degree, and so kudos to him for going back to college. But that also means that he's not out here playing. And unless he's sitting there with Joel Embiid and Andrew Wiggins working out every day, which maybe he is, I think that we're going to need to see him get some more. The Kings need to have someone with him almost at all times working on his game.
All right, James, you kind of brought me into the next segment that I want to get into, but I want to get into it a little bit later, and that's going to be talking about the draft. But before I get into that, I want to get Ryan into the show. Ryan, I know you have a couple questions for James. Go ahead and let them hear it.
Okay. My first or my question is, how would you grade the Pete D'Alessandro for his moves this season, and how would you say, or how would you tell how good of a job he's doing thus far, because there's been a lot of moves so far.
He made those moves. So, I mean, when you look at it, you can say, that, look, it's tough to grade somebody because not all these moves panned out, right? The one thing I know, we had a luncheon with Pete D'Alessandro at the end of the season, and he talked about needing to bring in shooters. And I actually asked him, I'm like, well, Pete, you want to bring in shooters, but this season you traded away Jimmer Fredette, Marcus Thornton, John Salmons, Gravis Vasquez, and Patrick Patterson. Pretty much outside of Isaiah Thomas, your 5 best shooters. So you want to bring in shooters, but you just dump 5 of them. 5 guys that could actually stretch the defense. And I think it's pretty remarkable what DeMarcus Cousins and Rudy Gay were able to accomplish when you consider that both of those guys need shooters to space the floor for them. So that is one thing that I think the Kings, a way that the Kings could really, really develop is if they can add shooters. Now, if you look at each individual trade and break them down, I mean, clearly the Luke Bonmute for Derek Williams trade at the beginning of the season, I think everyone was excited about it. He came out like gangbusters. He had all kinds of athleticism. He scored 30 points right off the bat. He had a huge breakaway game. He's another guy that personality-wise doesn't have it in him to force his will. And if you look at him and Rudy Gay, they're such contradictory players. You think they're both like super athletes, fluid, but Rudy Gay can't really run a break unless he's out in front of a break. If he gets the ball, he likes to stop and let everybody catch up and go run an offense. Derek Williams, when he's on the move and he's ripping down boards and running down to the other end of the court, he's incredible to watch. He's such a super athlete. But he started to get away from that, and when he got away from it, he just faded. He faded into oblivion. He's a player that literally has to have somebody set him up for everything. And the Kings don't have, after they traded Gravis Vasquez, they don't have a natural guy to set him up. So he ended up being a bad fit. But when he first got to Sacramento, he wasn't a bad fit because Gravis was on the roster. So I think if you look at that first trade and you you get all the way to the end of the season, you say, who would I rather have had, Luke Baumute or Derek Williams? I think hindsight, you can look back and say I would have rather had Luke Baumute. But realistically, you have to look at that trade was done when the Kings had no athleticism at all. It was before the Rudy Gay trade, and the dynamic of the team changed so much. Now, if you go to the Rudy Gay trade, I mean, clearly Pete D'Alessandro knocked one out of the park, and not only did he improve the talent level of the team, the interest of the team, but he brought in a player who has extreme talent. And we're talking about a guy who should have been an all-star in the past, who has all-star talent, who just along the way got lost a little bit, and the teams that were using him incorrectly lost his ability as well. I thought he fit in masterfully. I think that bringing in Rudy Gay, giving him a moment to like a good run, 60 plus games or 55 games, whatever it was, to really get to know
It
Sacramento.
was 55 games.
Yeah, see if this is a place he wants to live. Those are important things, especially if you go out into free agency and you got 2 or 3 days to impress, say, Andre Iguodala and say you want to come to Sacramento. That's not easy. But when you bring in Rudy Gay and you give him 55 games, you give him, basically from December until April to get to know the city, the people, the fan base, your front office, your coaching staff, the other players. That's a big deal because going forward, the Kings are going to need, if they want him to sign here, it's got to be because he wants to be a Sacramento King. And it would have been tough to do that in like a 2 or 3 day blitz interview process. Now they've had time to prove themselves. We'll see how Rudy Gay reacts to that. The players that they let go in the Rudy Gay trade, honestly, especially Patrick Patterson, everyone's like, oh, he had some good moments down the stretch. Well, honestly, Patrick Patterson, his qualifying offer was so high that the Kings would have never even done his qualifying offer. It wasn't that he wasn't worth the amount. He would have just signed the qualifying offer and taken the $6+ million bucks. So he's gone. Gravis Vasquez, again, is he the right fit? Probably not. So you would have watched him go. John Salmons, they would have bought out. Chuck Hayes, they prayed for someone to take Chuck Hayes, and lo and behold, someone did. I mean, nothing against Chuck, but I mean, he never ever lived up to any part of that contract that he signed. So I think what we saw here was a really good move by D'Alessandro in that deal. I don't mind the Marcus Thornton deal either. I think honestly, Marcus Thornton was done here. And, did he have some good moments again down the stretch? Sure, but he got to the playoffs, and he's been absolutely atrocious. I mean, I think he went 0 for 12 to start the playoffs. Thornton is just a temperamental guy. He's a guy who probably thinks he's better than he is. He's a guy that wants to shoot the ball more than he's ever going to get to on a team like the Kings who have so many scores. So I was okay with that deal, especially if Jason Terry gets bought out or gets retired or somehow frees up cap space, which I think is going to happen. So overall, I think you have to look at what D'Alessandro did. He upgraded talent greatly. Ben McLemore is a lot more athletic than anything that the Kings had in the past. So was Derek Williams. Ray McCallum was a great second-round steal. Adding Rudy Gay and getting Rudy Gay comfortable here may turn out to be like a franchise-changing moment. I mean, if you can lock him, you can get him to opt out and then lock him up for 5 years. That's incredibly huge for the Sacramento Kings to have that level of athlete. So I think
Let me interrupt you right there, James,
yeah,
because you kind of just brought it up, the opting out or opting in of Rudy Gay, and
it's
all
complex.
Kings fans are one. Yeah, it's very, very complex. It's a very, very weird situation for Kings fans to see. I mean, the Kings haven't had like a really good small forward since, I would say, Ron Artest, but even then, I would even go back to Peja Stojakovic, because I still think that far back. Yeah, so, I mean, what do you expect to happen? Because, I mean, Rudy Gay, if he opts in, yes, he gets the $19.3 million, but, he's at the peak. I've wrote about it just recently. He's at the peak of his career, in my opinion, being 27 years old. He's coming down to coming close to his 30s. In Toronto, he was looked at as one of the most inefficient players in the NBA, comes to Sacramento and, puts up career highs, I believe, in field goal percentage and ties his career high in points per game. So, I mean, what do you expect him to do?
It's really tough. I mean, if I had to put a number on it, I think I've put the number 60-40 that he stays. I think in a perfect world, What would happen is that Rudy Gay would opt out of the 19.3 million, and then he would sign a 5-year extension with the Kings for anywhere between 60 and $70 million. So that's a base salary between 12 and 14 million a year, right? That's what
Right.
I think his value is between 12 and 14 million a year, which is really high. He's not worth 19 million, and Rudy Gay knows that. He knows that no one else is going to give him that kind of money. So the Kings there are a couple options. The Kings can offer him an extension. They can offer him a 3-year extension on his 1-year deal if he decides to opt in. He can opt out and he can re-sign with the Kings for up to 5 years. He could opt out and he can sign with another team for up to 4 years, or he can opt in and just take the money. And again, he's 27, but at the beginning of next season he'll be 28. I think him signing a 5-year deal that takes him 28, 29, 30, 31, and 32 is the right move for him. Again, the Kings are the only team that can give him a 5-year deal. And I think that makes the most sense if he wants to play with this group of players. If DeMarcus Cousins is someone he can see himself with long term. His contract would basically coincide with DeMarcus Cousins. Cousins' extension kicks in this year. It's 4 years. So he would play most of his career guaranteed alongside DeMarcus barring trade. And then going forward, DeMarcus, if whether he re-upped or not, would be a question. But I think the Kings have a good shot here. They've got a shot, and that's better than what they would have had if they hadn't had him in for a 55 game, sneak peek. Um,
Yeah.
and what they did for him, the way that they were able to use him effectively and raise his value, I think that shouldn't be ignored. I think most people believe that he's better because the Kings put him in a situation to succeed. He's better because DeMarcus Cousins is a better big man than anyone in Toronto, and he really opened the floor up for Rudy Gay's game specifically. Like, they're a good match. If they can get along and they can work this out, they are as good as almost any pairing in the league.
All right. Hey, Ron, do you have another question for James while he's here?
Um, I would say I have one more. I would say the Kings' biggest issue this offseason is defense. So I was just wondering what would be the best position to get a defender at.
Well, it's difficult because I think what this team needs is they need two things, and you can circle defense and you can say, give me one or two great defenders and maybe they can have a huge effect. But in the NBA works in both ways. You can't just have a one-way player and think it'll work out. I think the easiest position for the Kings to fill and to get better at defensively is the power forward position. I think like if you're sticking at 7 in the draft and Aaron Gordon is sitting there, that is a guy that I actually could see, being a game changer for the Kings defensively. But there are other guys out there that can do the same thing. I mean, clearly, Serge Ibaka is probably the perfect fit next to DeMarcus Cousins, but Oklahoma's not giving him up.
No.
There are guys like John Henson. There are guys like, even Larry Sanders, guys that Milwaukee always seems to hoard these type of players. There are other players that, even like an Ekpe Udo, maybe he's a guy that can come in and actually have sort of a Luke Baumute effect on the game, but from that position. But what the Kings need is they need a combination, a guy that can actually stretch the defense and play defense. And it's very rare. I mean, again, Serge Ibaka is like the model. But that's the position. I think also you need a perimeter defender, so be it at the small forward position or the 2 guard. You need a guy who can do both. I could see if Memphis is done with Tony Allen being a really good fit for Sacramento, except for he's not a great 3-point shooter. We mentioned Thabo or Danny Green. Danny Green's another guy who would fit a lot of the needs of both a 3-point shooter and a defensive-minded player, a guy who can really stay in front of his man. But this team has to buy in. It's got to be the whole team working together, and Team defense is very finicky because the Kings actually have players that can play team defense. I think the problem is a lot of the time this year, a lot of the tertiary players, even anything after the big three, they felt a little left out on the offensive end, and they allow that to affect their defensive play as well. And it's nice for someone to say, why weren't you guarding your man? But you can turn around every time and say, well, I wasn't guarding my man because I fell asleep because I haven't been playing basketball for the last 25 minutes. I've been standing over in the corner because you won't pass me the ball. And I think that the word team is so huge with this team going forward with the Sacramento Kings. They need to work on becoming a tighter knit team on the floor. They're getting along better off the floor, which is good, but getting along on the floor is something that I think a lot of the secondary players really just got turned off by the way that Isaiah Thomas, Rudy Gay, and DeMarcus Cousins basically controlled the ball and ran this team themselves, and no one else got any touches. So I think that's something going forward. You can bring in pieces, but if they're not going to assert themselves, if they're not going to be, able to stand up and make the improvements where what we talked about earlier with Ben McLemore, if he can't vocalize his displeasure, then it's only going to continue, and that's something that the Kings have to work on.
Yeah, see, I completely agree with everything you said, except that I think the Kings can get someone like maybe an Al Farouk Amina, who I believe is a free agent at the end of this season, and gets him to come in where he doesn't demand the ball offensively at all. He can barely shoot the basketball on the offensive end, but he's a great defender on the defensive end. I think a specialty type of player, more as maybe a wing, someone who can come in and defend, maybe like a Kevin Durant or like the best player on the floor, but does not command the ball offensively, would actually be an okay fit for Sacramento. Would be actually an okay fit for Sacramento, for
Yeah,
this team.
I don't know if I buy Al-Farouq Aminu, but I mean, if you're talking about like Corey Brewer, or if you're talking, I mean, there are
There you go.
out there that do that, but I just don't know. You got to be good. You got to be good to take away minutes from Rudy Gay, right? I mean,
Right.
you need a power forward that can do what you're talking about, and those players just aren't out there. Because I mean, Rudy Gay is the starting small forward. I mean, the real interesting thing would be what happens if the Kings end up being the second or third pick in the draft. Joel Embiid goes number one, and they've got a choice between Parker and Wiggins, and then they also have a choice whether or not Rudy Gay is a long-term answer at small forward position. What do you do then? I mean, it's a quandary. It's like, you could basically burn your bridge with Rudy Gay by drafting the player that realistically you should draft. You have to draft. I mean, unless you just throw all caution to the wind and say Dante Exum is the guy and bring him in, and then you go into the next season with Ben McLemore and Dante Exum as your starting backcourt, which is so green. You're not going to get Rudy Gay to re-sign either. So, I mean, these are like, I don't envy what Pete D'Alessandro is faced with right now. He's got the Isaiah Thomas situation. He's got the Rudy Gay situation. He's got, it's 7 would almost be too easy. Just drafting at 7 or trading out at 7 and trying to get that piece that makes sense next to DeMarcus Cousins. And I honestly, I think there's a higher chance that the Kings trade this pick than they keep it. But, again, that's just my opinion.
All right, so you've already touched on it just a little bit there, just by saying trading the draft picks. I want to get into the draft because a lot of people, this site's been covering a lot. Where will the Kings go? They're projected to be number 7. The Kings need a defensively type of player. They also need shooters. What I would say, who are your top 3 prospects that you think the Kings should look at if the scenario happens that they're the number 7 pick? You already said you believe they're going to trade it, so that's probably one scenario. But what are the 3 prospects you think the Kings should really be keeping an eye on during this drafting process?
It's really tough because everything changes as you're going through the draft process. I mean, guys come out and, somebody's going to slide up. I mean, we see it every year. Guys like Dion Waiters, guys like, I don't know, Johnny Flynn, guys who come out of nowhere who are like, somewhere around like 15 to 20. And then next thing you know, was it Caldwell Pope flies up into the lottery, and you're like, what in the world? Where did that just come from?
Yeah,
Um,
Contavious.
yeah. I think that there's going to be somebody who flies up and is going to look around that spot. I think the top 4 or 5 players. Well, I'd say the top 5 are pretty much set. I mean, I think Randall and Exum, and then Wiggins, Embiid, and Parker are set as a top 5. You got Smart, and you got Gordon, you got Vonleh. You have like a handful of players that are around that 7 pick. I think again, Aaron Gordon to me is the right fit. He's the right guy to put next to DeMarcus Cousins. He's raw. He's going to take some time, but on a team that should get Carl Landry back next year and should be better and would still have Reggie Evans. I mean, he's a player that you could actually see fitting in right away and working out. Outside of that, I'm not sure. The reason why I tell people that I would trade the pick and that I believe that the Kings will consider very heavily trading the pick is that the Kings are at a point where, especially with Rudy Gay, if you want to sell Rudy Gay on burning the next 5 years of his career, which could be the last 5 years of his career in Sacramento, you need immediate help. I think this team realistically probably could have won 35 to 37 games if they were really, really pushing, and if they didn't have the DeMarcus Cousins injury and the Isaiah Thomas injury and the little injuries that hit Rudy Gay, and then all the trades, and on top of that, the Carl Landry injury. So if you had this full team, I think you probably could have won, between 35 and 38 games. So I don't think next season you can look at this team and say a 38-win season is a success, because I think realistically they should have already been pushing for that this last year. They had the talent to win that many games. So going forward, if you're hoping to win like 45 games, which seems astronomical, 17 wins, but really it's not 17 wins. It's 2 8.5-win increases that you should have already had. I think that's something that's possible, but I don't think it's possible with another 18 or 19-year-old kid thrown in the mix. It's possible if you're able to move that 7 pick, which this draft has extreme value. The number 7 pick has huge value, but the Kings have, they have $17 million in expiring contracts going into this season. So guys like Evans, Outlaw, Jason Terry, Derek Williams, all of these guys are expiring contracts, so they've got pieces to work with. You got Jason Thompson, who needs a fresh start and could be used as like a $6 million trade chip. So I think the Kings can package some of these players along with a draft pick, and they can either move way back in the draft and get a player that helps them now, or they can move out of the draft completely and get a player that really helps cement this team. And the reason why I think that is, number one, I think that this draft is really good in the top 6 or the top 5, but at 6 and 7 and 8, it gets a little dicey. Number 2, I believe that there were too many teams this year that made small tweaks that ended up having huge effects. Look at what happened with Portland. Portland goes from like 27 to like, I don't know, whatever they won. It was in the high 40s or the low 50s. They won a ton of games by adding like Mo Williams. They added and
their bench,
yeah, they added Mo Williams, and they added Robin Lopez, which the Kings could have had. The Kings gave up Robin Lopez. So, and I'm not saying they should have kept Robin Lopez. He may have fit, he may not have. But you look at those guys, you look at the Bobcats, who took a huge jump. You take a look at Phoenix, who took a huge jump with adding Eric Bledsoe and one of the Plumlees. I mean, that's it. And they take a huge jump to where they're one of the best teams in the league. So, and again, Gerald Green. You add Gerald Green. You add these players that aren't stars, but they have an immediate impact and upgrade the talent of your top 8. And I think the Kings are looking at this offseason saying, how can we improve the talent of our top 8? And that means that they're going to be active in trades, and they're going to be active in free agency, even if it's just their own 2 free agents, and they're going to be active with that number 7 pick, because I think right now that is their big sort of item that they have to go and move with, is that number 7 pick. And even if they go up to the number 3 pick, just think of the value of the number 3 pick, because in this draft, a number 3 pick gets you a all-star level player or near it. in trade.
All right, so this is my final question for you before we end this show because we're kind of going a little bit over the time. But James Ham's on, we don't care. So this two-part question is the draft and kind of with Isaiah Thomas. Do the Kings draft possibly another point guard since Isaiah Thomas is kind of in that same area where Tyreek Evans was last year, where he can probably just go out there and the Kings can send him an offer, a qualifying offer, but I mean he can go test his his worth or basically his worth
Value.
his value with other teams and see what he gets, and the Kings can say, okay, that's a little too much for us. Let's do a sign and trade deal. Let's go ahead and let him walk. I mean, do you kind of put that into your mind when you're taking this draft pick? Like maybe with a Marcus Smart or Dante Exum slides down to, let's say, a number 7, which probably will not happen, but
It's tough. Okay, those two guys. I personally, Smart is a lot like Tyreek Evans, except for actually, Tyreek Evans didn't have any major baggage coming in, and Smart does have baggage. Marcus Smart can't shoot at all, so I don't think he helps the Kings. Exum can't shoot. He's not a great shooter. I think he could help the team, but again, you're looking at such a young piece. If the Kings were had the option of just trading for a very, very good point guard, or making a move in free agency for a very, very good point guard, I think they might go that way as opposed to re-signing Isaiah Thomas. I think the problem is that only Kyle Lowry is a free agent. Most people believe he's going back to Toronto, and I don't think many people believe that there anyone else out there that is a marked improvement for over Isaiah Thomas. Now, could Exum be better than Isaiah Thomas long term? Sure, he could be. He could be the next coming of, I don't know, of Jason Kidd or.
That's who he's been compared to, as Jason Kidd.
Yeah. He might be the next one of those type players, but there's always an intangible that separates a player like Jason Kidd from anyone else. Jason Kidd had a hustle factor that you just can't teach and you just can't find anywhere. And so you could find a player who has the court vision, who has the ability, the leaping ability, the 40 time, all these, the cone drill time. But the fact is that Jason Kidd had an intangible that you couldn't measure, and that was his ability to hustle. I remember watching him shoot like a 16-foot jumper on the left elbow at Cal, and he bricked it horribly, and he got his own rebound on the right baseline. And I thought to myself, how did he just beat every single other player to the ball? The ball didn't even hit the ground. He missed a jumper and caught the ball on the other side. You're like, how did that just happen? In a crowded lane. And so I think, again, to get back to the point, Isaiah Thomas is really good. And the Kings want Isaiah Thomas to pass the ball more, and they want him to do other things. They may even see him as like the best six man that they could possibly bring in. But they would like to have someone else who could do something different, and I don't think that player is available. So as of right now, I think the Kings will look to retain Isaiah Thomas because, number one, they really like him as a person. They love his leadership. They probably don't think of him as the long-term fix at the point guard position. But that doesn't mean that he can't man the point guard position for a year or two and then be the best six man in the league. That's a possibility. So I could see a lot of different options here, but at the end of the day, I think the Kings look to secure the big man position first, and then move back to the point guard position and try to secure that in whatever way that they can. And chances are the way that they can is Isaiah Thomas. Now, again, just to throw way out there, if they get the feeling, or if Rudy Gay whispers in their ear, look, it doesn't look like I'm coming back, this whole thing could go sideways, and we could be looking at a completely different option for the Kings draft for their whole offseason plan. But I think they're going to have to take it day by day, and the first step is May 20th with the lottery. The next step is draft day, and then free agency starting right after draft day. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks here for Sacramento.
Very exciting, too, so I can't wait for the next week to come around. James, I want to thank you for joining the show today. I appreciate having you on. Just so everyone knows, where can people find you on Twitter?
At James_Ham is my Twitter handle, at James_Ham. And you can find me at CowbellKingdom.com. I write there every day, every other day, something like that. At least on Sundays, you know that. We have our podcast. I'm usually around.
All right, so everyone go check out James. Again, thank you for joining the show. Ryan, I know you're still there. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on Twitter at King Nandis Ryan, and they can find me on the Kings app at King Nandis.
All right, everyone, and I'm Vincent Miracle. You can find me on Twitter at VM Center. See all the articles on SacKingsNations.com. Get all your Kings news from SacKingsNation.com, CowbellKingdom.com, Fansided.com, and GoldenGateSports.com. James, I want to thank you again for joining the show, and until next time, Kings fans, bye-bye.